welcome to the inaugural episode of Cloud Chat with Stephan and Matt. My name is Stephan Stelter. Happy to be here. I've been involved in IT and technology ever since I got my Commodore 64, my very own computer. And it's been something that's fascinated me my entire life, trying to figure out ways to let computing help people do more, be more, achieve more. And I've been fortunate to have a lot of stops in my career at different size organizations, so from very small organizations, a couple person organizations working on projects for NASA, to really big Fortune 5 organizations, and being part of really large machines. So it's been a fun ride. I'm looking forward to chatting about the things that we encounter in IT today, and the things that I hear from customers about what sorts of problems they're looking to solve.
A Commodore 64, huh?
Actually, it's hold on, there it is. There's the T-shirt. Got to have the C64 T-shirt. Important.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Well, I was one of the guys who started with the Apple.
Right,
I think it was the 2 Plus. So,
yes.
And then there was the TSR teams, right? All the people who were doing the old Tandy.
Oh yeah, TRS 80. My dad had a Model 2, which had the 8-inch floppy drive. I mean, people don't even remember that. That was a monster. Yes.
I almost forgot about those. So my name is Matt Brown. I currently lead a program called NetApp at NetApp. I've actually been in IT. Well, let's just say before there was dial-up internet. It's been a long time. I actually spent the first part of my career in the dial-up internet. We were some of the first users. I remember that one of the first companies actually started out here in the Bay Area and started playing around with it. I ended up working for one of the largest dial-up internet companies. And then I became a customer of NetApp. We were the customer number 2, and that's how I ended up here. But I too played a lot of roles both on the business side and in IT. I actually started off as a computer programmer. I was so poor at it, they made me a manager, which is like the old adage, those who can't teach, and those who can't teach manage. So I ended up in the manager route. But yeah, I think, between the two of us, we definitely bring interesting perspectives on where IT is at today, having come from the early days of the technology and seeing where it's at. It's funny because part of it is what's old is kind of new again in many ways. Things centralized, decentralized, centralized, decentralized, and we keep going through those cycles. And now here we are talking about this thing called cloud. So, Stephan, where do you want to start? Do you want to kind of start with the state of cloud?
Oh, that is an interesting place to go, and I love this idea of the pendulum swinging between centralized and decentralized. There's a lot of thoughts about whether cloud is a new pendulum that will be swinging for people, or whether it's more like power or cooling. You have to do it, and it's a question of how much and where, and how do you optimize for it, right? How do you build your data center to be most optimal for leveraging the cloud? Just like how do you build your data center to be optimal for getting heat out of it and getting power into it? So it's interesting. It feels like it's a new state from my view. It feels like customers are really trying to sort through the ones that are doing it well, or the ones that are trying to sort through which workloads to put where. It does seem like you do have those extremes. There are people who have jumped onto it like it's a pendulum and are swinging their entire organizations into the cloud. And it remains to be seen how that approach proves out.
Yeah, but probably like you in the industry, anytime things become mandates, though, you start to question, well, really, what's going on here?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, especially when you talk about enterprise IT, not the product side of IT, but the enterprise side of IT, it's all about cost, and it's all about agility. I mean, that's why, I think our customers today expect enterprise IT to act as a service and to be responsive and to be cost effective. They used to be the old adage, quality, was it quality, cost, or time to deliver? Pick 2. And today, they want all 3.
Yeah,
and they want it now, and they want to be able to customize wherever they can. And I think it's an interesting state of being.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it feels that pick two thing really. It strikes me because I think the organizations that are going to be doing this all very well are going to pick two for one set of workloads and pick a different two for a different set of workloads, right? And that's the smart way. It's trying to not be all or nothing with your approach, but to be very prescriptive about it. And I think it's one of the things that I enjoy hearing about is the way that organizations are choosing to change the way that they do things that they've historically done inside of IT and decided to, I think you mentioned SaaS a moment ago, that decided to take a different approach to some of the things that aren't as competitive, aren't sources of competitive differentiation for the organization. Like, let's stop doing those things. Well, not stop, but let's find a different way to do them. And is that something that you've run into a fair
Oh
bit?
yeah. Well, one of the things, and we had talked about this in another conversation, the whole concept of SaaS really started with payroll, right? Why is a business trying to keep up with all the rules going around payroll? So why don't we just pay someone who knows, can worry about that? Well, flash forward to today, many common business practices are offered as a service. And if you really look at where we're trying to spend money as a corporation, where do you want your IT shop, all these very highly paid people, to spend their time? Do you want them spending the time on things like, running their HR tools or their payroll, or running Zoom, or running the collaboration tools?
Right.
No, you want them being innovative, and you want them to look at how do we power that innovation and how do we differentiate ourselves from our competitors. So I think, as time is evolving, IT becomes more focused on those things that do matter to the business. And yeah, I'm seeing that a lot, right? And I think, as we were kind of talking about cloud there, when cloud first started coming out, this idea that you could rent or borrow or pay for compute on a per cycle basis, it kind of, to some extent, brought me back the old days of the old mainframes, right?
Yeah, LPARs. Let's cut up slices, and yeah.
So the concept wasn't brand new to us, but then when it became, we don't have to run any of this on our shop, and I think it became attractive to some CIOs that now I can get out of the business of IT and really focus on, again, on those things that matter. I think the cost then hit them in the face, and I think that's kind of where we're at today. Is how do you use the cloud wisely to power innovation? But also, how do you keep those costs managed, right?
Yeah, an article that was put out, a paper, a post from Andreessen Horowitz, the $1 trillion paradox. Interesting read. It talks a little bit about that. How do you decide what to cloud and what not to, and looking at the rate of growth of customer base or market adoption of a technology seems to be a really good way to think about things. To your point, if you need to deploy a whole lot of capability to support the activity, and you don't know if you're going to need to turn the knobs up aggressively very quickly, then the cloud is the ideal place to pull that off. And on the flip side, if it's a very static workload and you know it, and it runs 24/7, and there aren't opportunities for saving by turning things off at night or during off hours or what have you, then maybe on
At a certain
premises.
scale,
Yes.
on-prem
Right.
makes sense. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But you do have to have that scale. I mean, it's interesting because, people, when you look at startups, no startup is going to get funding to go build their data center, right? I mean, and to kind of putting a kind of another, what do you want to call it, perspective on it. So if I was starting up my own company, I would start in the cloud. Even those things are predictable, right? Because I'm not going to get funding, and I don't want to spend my time focusing on doing that type of work. But there's a point in time, especially after you become public, that operations then become core to your day-to-day activities. And at that point in time, all those things that are predictable, to your point, should probably come back into a more cost predictable model. You don't want to lose your innovation, though. I mean, that's, I think, one of the biggest things that cloud has allowed us to scale up like really quickly. And just as you mentioned, then maybe just turn off when you're not using it. And I think those give you some very unique advantages, even in our own company, in NetApp. As you know, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today if we didn't unleash the power of cloud in terms of creating our own software and looking at the way our software delivers. It's that capability of again, really unleashing innovation, not creating bottlenecks, that I think really has allowed companies to create very unique offerings. Just another quick thing, I think another topic that'd be interesting, fun to talk about is where that is innovation is taking us. Imagine if the cloud, and we can talk about what the cloud is, didn't exist and we were going through COVID. I mean, one of the interesting things about COVID is we could shop from home. Everything we could get delivered. We didn't have to leave our house. We could order takeout food. We could do everything.
Right.
Imagine if the cloud didn't exist and that happened.
Yeah. And how does a small mom and pop restaurant provide an online experience for customers without building IT staff? And I mean, it would be,
it just wouldn't have happened,
untenable.
right?
Yeah.
We couldn't have stayed home. We couldn't have. We couldn't have functioned. I mean, categorically, everything would have literally came to a grinding halt. So it's
a really interesting thing to think about, just in the food side of things, when you think about how SaaS has played a role in that, where you think about any of the restaurants where, well, we don't want to hire delivery drivers and have to think about the liability concerns of driving. And some companies view that, some restaurants, some food providers have a core competency, which is speed, and they want to do that with their own drivers. But others are perfectly happy to have something like an Uber Eats or Grubhub or some other as a service provider handle that last mile function. Look at that, coming right back to dial-up and last mile conversations.
Just well, like I think it's fascinating. So I kind of guess where I was going with that is cloud's here. The concept of the cloud is here, and the question mark I think is now what is the right cloud to use, when, and why? It was funny. I just had an article come across my email this morning, and it said the cloud honeymoon is over. And what I really think it's talking about is the enterprise side of IT. At the end of the day, enterprise side has to run as leanly as possible. And they do expect that to run as a service, and they do expect IT to really contribute to the innovation of the company, whether it's through internal making processes better, whether it's running sales systems, creating a unique customer experience. That's what internal IT is supposed to do. But costs do matter. It's funny because back to your $1 trillion paradox article, I was in a meeting with an architect, and the architect said, well, Matt, once we get all this stuff out of IT, it won't matter where this stuff runs. The costs won't matter because they're only considered business costs. Well, your $1 trillion paradox says something different. That costs
indeed
do matter. And the cost of doing business always matters. I mean, if you really abstract it, why are we in business? We're in business to make a profit, which means you want to lower that cost of goods sold to as little as possible without impeding your ability to remain competitive in the marketplace. At the end of the day, that's why businesses exist. And so then we have to, as the technology providers, both of us being at different parts of IT, have to look at it and say, well, how does this matter? You're providing IT to our external customers through the partners. I'm helping provide IT internally for NetApp. But at the end of the day, our goals are exactly the same. And then the challenge then is okay, back to your original question was so what cloud and why and when and how do we do this well?
Oh, the details, so many of them. There are a few, and there are choices, and there are how do you align them up and compare? It's not trivial. But it is fun to talk about. It's fun to explore, and it's fun to discuss the strategies that are available to organizations today to help with those decisions.
Well, and to talk a little bit more about that too. So, we use some great examples like the food industry being able to outsource the driver part of it, being able to even outsource even the advertising, things like Yelp and stuff, right? To let people know that they even exist and provide menus or what have you. Well, if you look at corporate IT too, I think sometimes we've been doing the same thing for so long, we don't think to look outside. What can other companies help us do, whether it is through development, whether it is through getting some of these applications out of my environment. And I think sometimes we need to kind of nudge our fellow IT people to say, hey, as you're dealing with the partners and I'm dealing with other customers, you kind of go, well, why are you still doing that on prem? Is it just because that's the way you've always done it? Or do you feel there's some competitive advantage to doing it yourself? Because if there's not competitive advantage, it shouldn't be in your data center anymore.
Right. It is interesting that there's some organizational inertia around projects and things that organizations, even if you question that internally, is this a core competency? There is a lot of that inertia. Well, we've always done it this way and it works. So having that motivation to transform, make a decision to do something different is sometimes it's a struggle. And the customers that with whom I speak, they have that struggle where this is the way that we're comfortable doing it. So even if there is a better way to SaaSify things, there's resistance to that organizational inertia.
Yeah, there's another piece of resistance there too. The concern about their data, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about, right? Is their data. Big financial institutions, people in the healthcare, people in oil and gas, people are very concerned about putting that data into a place where they can't have full control over it for a variety of reasons. And I don't think those problems are going to go anytime soon. But yet you don't want to go and build giant on-prem data centers to do the analysis of those types of data sets, right? You don't want to have to create, or be logged down because your data is in one place and your users are another, and create an inconvenience in terms of being able to actually use or access that data. So then you have to copy that data. So it becomes interesting even to the concept of, so how do I leverage the cloud in a place where I am very worried about my data? I'm worried about the propagation and making too many copies of my data. And I think that's probably one of the next big sets of challenges that our customers are seeing, is that I'm cool with moving to the cloud, but I have all this data and I'm really concerned about security and then the ownership of the data.
Yeah, it reminds me of conversations around buzzwords that feel like they're getting created to some extent, copy data management. And do customers have a problem with multiple copies of data? They're not really aware, or they might be aware that they have that problem, but trying to figure out how to have the conversation with a customer that they might not even be aware of this multiple data set issue that they are currently experiencing, and then understanding the ramifications of that when they create another copy of that data as they move it to one or more clouds, and how to explore that and manage it, handle that governance element.
It's funny because, as I'm thinking, we're obviously that should be its own topic, because just the management and governance of data, the whole concept of, if you look at data as lots of little elements of things, and each data element is important, some are more important than the others, you do want to have that master data plan. And then it leads into the conversation of, well, there only should be one place that the single source of truth for that data. So when I go get that data, I have confidence that data is reliable, it's accurate, which is an area I think that's still kind of untapped. I think there's a lot of people who try to do it, but I really have not seen a really clean area of saying this is how you manage your data. We've always managed it by application, and I think that concept of an application is kind of going away in favor of capability. And when you more abstract the capability away from an application, the more important it is to be able to manage your data in a whole different manner.
It is absolutely fascinating. And with the lens through which I view things, I still talk to customers where their organization is unwilling to blend things on the same infrastructure. There's still very much a siloed approach to some data sets within the organization, unwilling to blend it with anything else, infrastructure-wise or outside of that. So it's fascinating. I'm excited about some of the topics that we've touched on today, and I'm looking forward to diving into them more deeply in future podcasts.
I definitely think that we'll be talking much more, but so let's kind of wrap it up on a couple of things. So we kind of started off with the state of cloud. Let me kind of give my parting views of where we're at right now, and maybe that would be the lead in for our next conversation. So clearly, with stuff like the $1 trillion paradox, and I got this one that came across this morning, said the cloud honeymoon is over. I think people are really starting to understand that costs do matter. But it doesn't mean that the cloud doesn't have its position, its place. I do strongly feel that the only place to do innovation today is in the cloud. To me, it's without question. And the cloud, in terms of SaaS, is how companies can focus their IT shops. So that's how I kind of would wrap up where I see cloud as today. SaaS for those things that run the business. Innovation and unique customer experiences should be leveraging the public cloud. And then when you're running the business in terms of those things you can't SaaS, it probably should be in your private cloud at a certain scale to save you money and time. What are your thoughts, Stephan?
Oh my gosh, I think that was the perfect summary, and I'm excited at picking apart all of those pieces. Right, when you start getting into the details of how do you do this, the SaaS piece, and how do you make connections meaningful to other applications within the organization, right, to get to that single set of data. So excited for future conversations, Matt.
Boy, time has flown.
Sure has.
for our inaugural session. We covered a lot of topics, but it's been always a pleasure speaking with you. I really enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to future conversations.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.